Thank you. We're ready to proceed. First of all, I want to turn the microphone over to Helen Schaub. We're so happy to have you. Thank you.
I wanted to apologize for being late.
Move it closer to
I just wanted to apologize for being late. I unfortunately had a family health emergency and just came from the hospital, but I'm glad to be here, and apologies for being late.
Thank you. All right. By tradition, the right to make the first proposal alternates between the owner representatives and the tenant representatives, and this year, the first to make a proposal will be the owner representatives.
Thank you. I am here representing the nearly 25,000 landlords. Hello? Oh, sorry. Now you hear me. Sorry. I am here representing the nearly 25,000 landlords who provide rent-stabilized housing for approximately 1 million New Yorkers throughout the 5 boroughs. Let me begin by stating that we understand that no one likes to see their rent increase, no matter how fair or small that increase may be. We also believe, however, that for the system to continue to work for all parties involved, rent increases are at times necessary. We have a system that works for 1 million tenants, and it is the responsibility of all those who make up the system to ensure that it continues to provide affordable housing to those tenants into the future. We believe that a third consecutive year with no rent increase for rent-stabilized units would not only be unjustified, but also possibly a disaster for many of the significant number of landlords who are prohibited from increasing rents. Landlords who are prohibited from increasing rents for major capital improvements, individual apartment improvements, IAAs, or vacancy allowance due to their regulatory agreements. According to the data, operating costs, also known as PIAC, is up 6.2%. This is in contrast to the 2 prior years when the PIAC was either very low or negative. As many of you remember, negative PIAC has been cited by members of this panel as a determining factor in arguing for the 0% increase in rents for 2015 and 2016. And we believe this year's 6.2 increase in operating costs carries equal importance and should merit an equitable increase in rents. While NOI has also increased this year, the unfortunate reality for landlords is that the increase in NOI is calculated using both market rate and rent-stabilized units. Given that the rents have remained constant for the rent-stabilized units while expenses increased, NOIs more than likely decreased across the city's rent-stabilized portfolio. Another year without a rent increase for rent-stabilized units will continue to put an unfair burden on tenants who, along with the landlords of rent-stabilized units, are being asked to underwrite a third year of stagnant rents for tenants in rent-stabilized units.
Please.
Issues of fairness notwithstanding, we believe that the failure to pass an equitable increase this year only increase the probability of larger increases rents for rent-stabilized tenants in the future. It is important we do what's right for all and what is necessary to avoid large and burdensome rent increases that could only be made worse by another year without any rent increase at all for landlords. Therefore, to avoid the probability of a more drastic rent increase,
Please, we need to hear the proposal, please.
our proposal is as follows. Apartments, 4% for a 1-year lease and a 6% for a 2-year lease. Apartment vacancy allowance of 20%, 10% sublet allowance. For lofts, 4% for a 1-year lease and a 6% for a 2-year lease. Loft vacancy allowance of 20%. Special guidelines shall be whichever is greater, the maximum base rent plus 50% plus fuel cost adjustments, or the HUD fair market rents as adjusted for apartment size and utilities.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, let me just repeat what the proposal is, and please, we need to get this on the record. Apartments, 4% for a one-year lease and 6% for a two-year lease. Apartment vacancy allowance of 20%, 10% sublet allowance. Lofts, 4% for a one-year lease and 6% for a two-year lease. Lofts vacancy allowance of 20%. Special guidelines shall be whichever is greater, the maximum base rent plus 50% plus fuel cost adjustments, or the HUD fair market rent as adjusted for apartment size and utilities. That's the proposal that's about to be discussed. Is there any discussion on the motion? The chair recognizes Harvey Epstein.
Thank you. I just want to look at what the data told us over the last couple of weeks, because I think that's really what we need to talk about. I think we need to look at what's really happening in the city that we live in, and I have to say that these proposals are far from what we've seen, far from what the data shows us. Well, we've learned that we have record homelessness in New York. We've learned that 35% of tenants are paying more than 50% of their income towards rent. We've learned that 43% of people going into the shelter system come out of rent-stabilized apartments. We've learned so much information about tenants. We also learned how well owners are doing. I mean, net operating income is up. Things are going well. And the story that they're telling isn't the story that we see. It's not the story of New York. It isn't the story I see every day. It isn't the story I live every day. I live in this city. I work in this city. We see what happens here. And I want to tell the board members and the public members to vote down this proposal as being not in line what we've learned, not in line with the data, and not in line what we believe the future for New York should be.
Any further discussion? Anyone else wish to be heard on the motion? All right, then we'll proceed to a vote. Hillary Botein?
No.
Harvey Epstein?
No.
Shayla Garcia?
No.
Cecilia Hosa?
No.
David Reese?
No.
Helen Schaub?
No.
Mary Seraphy?
Yes.
Scott Walsh?
Yes.
Kathleen Roberts, no. All right, the motion fails, 2 pro, 7 con. At this time, I would like to put forward a motion for proposed rental adjustments for rent-stabilized apartments and lofts. I move to adopt the language. I'm sorry? Sorry, I got ahead of myself. We're moving to the tenants proposal.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Hello? Okay. I wanted to first thank you all for being here tonight and talking about and showing the importance of tenants' voices being heard. I would like to start by talking about the crisis that we have in New York City around housing. And so we exist as a board because there is a housing crisis. 60,000 people every night are sleeping in homeless shelters. 33,000 of them are children. 100,000 people will go through the shelter system this year alone. 43% of them would be coming from rent-stabilized units. And then, about 35% of tenants are paying more than 50% of their income in rent. In some boroughs, that's 50% of their income is going towards rent, and that is not right. Landlords have seen their net operating income increase for the 11th consecutive year in a row. And so we can't have this happen any longer. And so landlords are not only able to maintain their costs, we're also seeing that landlords are paying 57 cents of every dollar to run their buildings. This is down from 68% a few years ago. Foreclosures are a historic low, and the sale prices are at historic highs. So they're selling their buildings a lot more money than they were selling them a few years ago. Wages have been stagnant for tenants. Homelessness is at an all-time high. Evictions are at an all-time high. Tenants are paying a median rent of $1,317, while their salary is a median of $43,261,000. This means that the tenant to rent income ratio is 32%. In addition, last year, we discussed, our rent decision was to have 0% for 1 year and 2% increases for landlords. While landlords advocate groups sued the board to challenge this decision, the Supreme Court determined that we can and should consider tenant affordability in making our decision as a rent guidelines board. Our decision impacts 2.5 million tenants who are trying to get by. Let's not fall into the rhetoric of modest increases that do not affect tenants. Every increase that we propose puts tenants at a tighter budget. The rent guidelines board adjustments are not the only increases tenants face. They also face major capital improvements, individual apartment increases, apartment vacancies, air conditioning fees, washing machine fees, legal fees, late fees, damage fees, and some communities are pressured by buyouts. In 2011, tenants were paying a median of 31.9 of their income in rent. In 2015, they were paying 32%. We are creating an untenable situation for families across the city. This has to stop. Tenants throughout the city are struggling, while landlords are just doing fine. Let's talk about how landlords are doing when their income has increased 4.4%, while their costs only rose 1%. Our charge is not to continue to widen the gap for owners' profit, but to make sure a rent-stabilized system is equitable. This is not an easy thing to do when the existence of our board means that we're in a housing crisis. Our mandate is to simulate a fair market levels for both landlords and tenant, which is why we're asking for us to rise to the charge and vote for a two-tier system for these adjustments. This means that landlords that have taken advantage of MCIs, IAIs, and vacancy increases in the last 3 years would see a rent adjustment of -4% to 0%. -4% to 0% for a 1-year lease, and -2% to 0% for 2-year leases. If the landlord has not been able to take advantage of these increases for a host of other reasons, the range should be 0% to 2% for a 1-year lease and 0 to 2% for a 2-year lease. We demand a fair decision for this year and rely on you, the public members of this board, to stand up to your values and your conscience.
Excuse me, I didn't hear the very beginning of the proposal on the 1 year with the -4 to what?
-4 to 0 for a 1-year lease, -2 to 0 for a 2-year lease if MCIs, IAIs, and vacancy increases have been taken in the last 3 years, and 0 to 2 and 0 to 2 for landlords who haven't been able to take advantage of vacancy, MCIs, and IAIs.
And do you have a proposal on the sublet allowance?
0.
And do you have proposal on the loft guidelines?
0. Oh, same as the rent stabilization, sorry.
Okay. And do you have a proposal on the special guideline?
0.
And do you otherwise adopt the language that was previously read in as the proposed order?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a second to that motion?
Yes, there is. Did you say we 0 on the sublet allowance? Do you
Yes.
get that?
I got that, yes. Thank you. All right, any discussion on the motion by the tenant members? All right, then we'll proceed to a vote. Hillary Botine.
No.
Harvey Epstein.
Yes.
Shayla Garcia.
Yes.
Cecilia Hosa. No. David Reese.
No.
Helen Schaub.
No.
Mary Seraphy.
No.
Scott Walsh.
No.
And Kathleen Roberts, no.
Yes.
All right, we're ready to proceed, please. Now it's my turn. At this time, I would like to put forward a motion for proposed rental adjustments for rent-stabilized apartments and lofts. I move to adopt the language of the proposed apartment and loft order number 49 as read into the record at this meeting, and I move to adopt the following proposed rental adjustments for rent-stabilized apartments and lofts. For apartments, for a 1-year lease, 1 to 3%. For a 2-year lease, 2 to 4%. Sublet allowance of 10%. No vacancy allowance is permitted except as provided by Sections 19 and 20 of the Rent Regulation Reform Act of 1997. For lofts, for a 1-year lease, 1 to 3%. For a 2-year lease, 2 to 4%. Vacant loft units, no vacancy allowance is permitted under this order, therefore, except as otherwise provided in Section 286, Subdivision 6 of the Multiple Dwelling Law, the rent charged to any tenant for a vacancy tenancy commencing on or after October 1, 2017, and on or before September 30th, 2018, may not exceed the base rent referenced above, plus the level of adjustment permitted above for increased periods. Special guideline and decontrolled units, 33% above the maximum base rent. To summarize, in accordance with my motion, you are voting on the adjustments I proposed and the proposed language of the order. Is there a second?
A second.
Is there any discussion?
So I would really encourage the members of this board to vote against this proposal. It isn't borne out by the data. I do hear the concerns about owners who are struggling, even though we haven't met those owners ever. But the reality is, what we're seeing is thousands of tenants throughout the city coming before us saying what's going on. And what we're seeing is data that says that owners' income exceeds their costs. And not only do the income exceeds their costs, they continually do better year after year. And this idea that a range of 1% to 3% and 2% to 4% is not in line with anything that we've seen, not in line with the data around affordability, not in line with the data we've seen around foreclosure rate, mortgage rates, expenses. The only thing they would look at is the price index. And while the price index core was 4.5%, that's only what the change in cost is. I mean, just because the cost of paper goes up doesn't mean we use more paper. It just means that the cost of paper goes up. What we only see is the income and expense data where we see actual expenses. And what we've learned is, in the last report we got just a few weeks ago, that owners' expenses only went up 1% while their overall income went up 4%. That's what the data says. That's what we're looking at. And this idea that this range is in line with anything we said is not in any way, shape, or form in line with what we've been seeing for the last few weeks, what we'll be seeing in the public hearing. I would encourage all the public members to vote no.
Thank you. Anyone else for discussion?
I just want to also highlight a little bit what Harvey was saying about the tenant affordability. And so if we're in this room right now, overwhelmingly tenants are coming out after work with their children in the rain to make sure that they voice their opinion about the fact that we should be having a rent rollback. This proposal ignores all of those voices in the room right now. This proposal ignores all the thousands of people we are going to encounter in the public hearings, all of the people that are going to be representing hundreds of rent-stabilized buildings throughout the city who know and need a rent rollback, not only because our data historically has shown that landlords have been overcompensated, but because we know that there are 60,000 people sleeping in a shelter tonight, because we know 33,000 of them are children, because we know landlords have been increasing rents and pushing buyouts and increasing rents through MCIs, IAIs, and fees. And so we know that that's a climate that we're dealing with, and we know that those are all the reasons that landlords have been able to increase rent. This proposal does not address that, and as a board, I encourage us to do that by voting this proposal down.
Is there any further discussion? All right. We're going to proceed to the vote. Hillary Botein?
Yes.
Harvey Epstein?
No.
Shayla Garcia?
No.
Cecilia Hosa?
Yes.
David Reese? Yes. Helen Schaub?
Yes.
Mary Sarafi?
No.
Scott Walsh?
No.
Kathleen Roberts, yes. The motion carries. By a vote of 5 to 4. Is there any further business? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you.